Hi, my name is Josie Pooler, and welcome to my Speak Out podcast. I am very excited to do this, and welcome to the first episode of this series. I am going to be talking about the recent uptick in Asian American hate crimes, and I plan on talking about specific events that have occurred, tracing its history back to even imperialism. I'm going to be talking about my own experiences with racism as an Asian American woman. I'm also going to be talking about the effects and self care related to processing these kinds of events, as well as talking about potential responses as a community, as the Asian American community. So, this first episode specifically, I am going to be talking mostly about the recent events that have occurred. Um, so, let's begin. Ever since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, we have seen a massive uptick in the amount of hate crimes committed against Asian American people in the United States. The largest one, and the one that seems to have garnered the most news and media attention, were the shootings that happened in Atlanta, Georgia, at three different spas. Here, a white man murdered 8 people, 6 of whom were Asian women. Experts in the field studying hate crimes and issues like these, they warn that a rise in hate crimes have been motivated specifically by male supremacy, although Asian Americans were and have been targeted in almost 4,000 hate crime incidents in the past year. The man who committed the shooting in Atlanta was said to have had a sexual addiction and killed these women to reduce any temptation he felt. And apparently, he had visited these spas previously as a customer. The incident, as far as I have researched, has not been classified as a hate crime, and it's unclear if it ever will be. Um, a lot of the police involved have cited gender-based motivation and male supremacy terrorism. A lot of this would stem from male entitlement and the patriarchy, and specifically a desire to preserve gender roles. There is a group online who call themselves incels, which stands for involuntarily celibate. Um, and this group specifically has become very aggressive, and almost militant, and can lead and have led to these kinds of attacks, perpetrated against women. Involuntarily celibate people, this community sees that women owe them sex. It is interesting to note that a lot of sources, specifically ones who are investigating this, have mostly cited gender-based motivation rather than racial motivation, which I find to be highly problematic. Um, I definitely believe that these kinds of things are linked to the extreme fetishization of Asian women and the hypersexualization of them, as well as just general disdain as the coronavirus pandemic has continued. The officer at one of the original press conferences after this shooting in Atlanta made a comment that said that this white man who perpetrated the attack had a really bad day. And fortunately, this officer is no longer speaking for this case. It is an understatement to say that this man had a bad day. It's so much more beyond a bad day, and so many people's lives are really damaged. And it's, as an Asian American woman, it's honestly really hard to process. And thinking about how I could be in danger from someone like this, who thinks like this, who sees me as a sexual temptation or racial scourge on the world. It is also interesting to note that the killer is an evangelical Baptist. Um, Looking at this history, I definitely believe it's interesting that he has Christian roots. It reminds me of how purity culture is really popular in Christianity right now, but um, I feel like it can lead to a lot of guilt and shame surrounding someone's own sexual identity, um, which could honestly lead to a lot of repression and sometimes these kinds of attacks. I definitely feel like the church could play a bigger role in supporting people rather than otherwise. I think one of the biggest issues over the past year was former President Donald Trump. Former President Donald Trump repeatedly, incessantly used racist language to talk about Asian Americans, specifically calling the coronavirus the Chinese virus or the Kung flu. Fortunately, current President Biden banned the use of these kinds of slurs and language within the federal government. But there has been an enormous rising tide of anti-Asian bias. More than 110 episodes have occurred since March of 2020, and it's clear that they are racially based. There is also a general undercounting of hate crimes in general throughout our entire history. A lot of times, hate crimes are reported as other crimes to keep the number relatively low. And honestly, xenophobia is still really rampant in this country. Being afraid of those who aren't like you, those who are different from you, and specifically people from other countries, it's made it a really dangerous place to look different. And it's definitely been exacerbated by the pandemic. And these communities, including the Asian American community, has been overlooked as well as brutalized by law enforcement. And we have essentially been blamed and scapegoated for this crisis. Examples of things that have happened to Asian Americans individuals over the past year include countless verbal assaults, name calling, shunning. There's been deliberate avoidance, physical assault. Some people have been spat on, coughed on, told to go back to China. Asian Americans have been increased targets of robberies, and many people have started targeting elder Asian Americans, especially because they are so vulnerable. Many of these instances have been caught on camera, including some pretty severe ones, like some women being shoved on the ground, and this other woman was slashed in the face with a box cutter. Another woman was set on fire. Federal hate crime data for 2020 hasn't been released yet, but the data for 2019 has shown that hate crimes are at the highest level they've been in decades. It is really sobering and terrifying to read these things. And it's honestly really traumatic, even as someone who is adopted and doesn't really share that link culturally with like the Asian American community. This is definitely something that deeply affects me as well. And I'm really excited to explore this with you guys more and look at this further. But I wanted to provide a basis of the situation that is happening now, the lived reality of so many people. I think having a clear understanding of what people are actually going through and are dealing with are crucial to the first step, which is empathy, and then any work that can be done in the future. So I really hope this was helpful. The next episode is going to be about history and tracing anti-Asian racism a long way back. Thank you.